When I was an adolescent, I had to do a lot of work to find horror. I had to go to the drugstore and be the first kid on the block to get the magazines, Famous Monsters of Filmland. I had to look far and wide to make sure I didn't miss horror films and horror television programs. Nowadays, horror is omnipresent. Kids have it easy. There are major television programs, The Walking Dead, American Horror, and even things that aren't directly labeled as horror have monsters in them. And with monsters comes horror. And yet this popularity is strange in a way because horror is a kind of genre that raises an emotional state that is itself kind of paradoxical. The paradox of horror is the question of how it is we can actually enjoy being in the state of horror, since it looks like horror is a pretty unpleasant state to be in. Horror is a compound of at least two other emotions, fear and disgust. We're afraid of the monster, and we're also disgusted by the monster. Think how often monsters in horror fictions are just oozing, dripping with slime and deterioration. Disgust is usually something we try to avoid. After all, it gives us a kind of gag response. We don't like going into the refrigerator and drinking sour milk. We don't spend Saturday night down at the morgue looking at autopsies, and yet we go to the movies to see horror films and send away to get the latest Stephen King and the latest Clive Barker. Fear is a little bit more complicated. After all, there are skydivers, and a lot of us, at least when we're younger, enjoy taking rides on roller coasters. But even if we can explain how we can enjoy fear, it's harder to explain how we can enjoy the kind of disgust that often accompanies horror fictions. There are several attempts to do this. Maybe the most famous is the psychoanalytic approach, which suggests that really the id is using the experience of disgust in order to realize some desire, thereby fooling the superego. So we really do desire to be embraced by Vampira or by Dracula and to have their mouths on our neck. But we can't admit that to the superego. So what we do is we auto-stimulate ourselves to feel disgust, as if to say to the superego, wait, I'm not really having a good time. After all, I'm being attacked. The problem with the psychoanalytic approach is that it really isn't comprehensive enough, because after all, there are lots of monsters where it's hard to imagine what our erotic desires might be. So we have to look somewhere else. One place is to say, well, it's not as if there's a trade-off between paying for my satisfaction in terms of desire by disgust. It's just that we enjoy being, for example, frightened. And that's, again, good enough for fear, perhaps, but it doesn't explain the disgust element. My own tendency is to go back to another kind of trade-off theory. And that is, what we're interested in horror is having our minds blown, being shown something out of the ordinary, something unnatural. Horror is kind of a descendant of those fairground anomalies, like the cow with two heads. The trade-off is between disgust and fascination. The horror narratives of both fiction, writing, and film always involve trying to go through some process of discovery. Suddenly all of the virgins in London are disappearing. What's the cause of it? It's revealed there's a werewolf at large, and the werewolf is kept off stage for a while, building up our curiosity. What is this going to look like? In a way, I think we have a kind of cognitive or epistemological curiosity that horror addresses. Because horror deals with the unknown or the unthinkable or the unimaginable, and it's a constant lure to an emotion that Hobbes considered to be an emotion, but we often don't today, which is curiosity. Curiosity is what drives desire. It gets us into the theater. Now, I'll be the first person to admit that not all horror fictions really reward that curiosity with fascination, but the great ones do.